Okay, I'll go ahead and give you our 2-minute warning. We'll start class in a couple of minutes. It's not on. Does that look good? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. If you can make your way to your assigned pew, we're going to jump into Exodus 15. Glad to see so many of you here. I say this and I mean it and I don't mean it. I want us to get back to normal, but maybe a different kind of normal. Not the old normal. I want a new normal. But it is nice to see some folks that we hadn't seen in a while and to have an opportunity to worship together and to study. And so if you're joining us for the first time or you're online and you haven't been with us before, we've been going through a study of Exodus. We have been crawling through the study. Some people who have been here with us have said that we have been wandering around in the desert, much like the Israelites. And I'm okay with that, even if you're not. I like to take a slow approach to this. And so we're going to continue to look at Exodus. We chose this series several months back, or I chose this several months back because I just felt in some ways that we were a lot like the Israelites of where are we now, and who is God and what's going on in the world, and how can we glorify Him. And so, and even though I think we pick on the Israelites a lot, I think it's important that we recognize that in many ways we kind of walk in their sandals too. That we find ourselves seeing the glory of God and then saying, where are you? In fact, I had a conversation with a very godly man, loves the Lord, and he said, look, I've seen God work in powerful ways all throughout my life, and then it's like I get excited, I get fired up, and the next thing I know, it's just like I'm grumbling and complaining. Like, what's going on here? And I said, I just think that's a part of being human, and it's not easy to choose to follow Jesus. It is so much easier to make our masters money or comfort or whatever it is that we want to serve our own egos. And to set that aside and to worship God is really a hard thing. Whether you're living in the desert of sin, as we'll talk about, or near Sinai, or you're living in the desert of New Mexico, it can be really difficult. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that. So here's where it gets really crazy. This is where, to me, it gets really crazy. And this is where I think it's important that we do study Exodus because it reminds us of how easy it is to forget. Okay, so I didn't see it. I wasn't there. Lynn was... He was nearly born when they crossed. It was your parents who crossed the Red Sea, right? So, but I just can't imagine all the emotions and the excitement surrounding what had just taken place. Now, Exodus chapter 15 is going to make it seem like it happens a little faster than what it really did. And I want to give the Israelites a little more slack. But just a quick glance at the page. I mean, if you just glance down at the page of Exodus chapter 15, you have verse 21 is when Miriam, she stands up, she gets her tambourine, or they call it a tremble, or they call NIV does call it a tambourine here, and a timbrel is another word that's used. Other women, they grab that and they start dancing and playing these tambourines, and they're singing this opening verse, "Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea." Verse 21, Exodus chapter 15, period. Okay, now I just think about that for just a second, because you can even look, just the way it is on the page, you can tell it's more in like this poem format, right? You can see the lines and they're tabbed over and they're centered, and you're like, oh, okay, that's right. And then you start back into it. Red Sea, Pharaoh and his armies drown. Moses and the Israelites, and then Miriam joins in with this re-singing of the first verse. That takes the majority of Exodus chapter 15. It's almost like their throats are still a little sore from all the singing that they did, from all the excitement. Like, this is awesome. Like, this is really good. The tambourine just got put away. Okay. And here we have in verse 24. So 21, they're singing. 24, they're complaining. Just think about that for a second. Now, there's going to be a little bit more time that takes place between when the waters were parted, the singing and the dancing, and then the complaining, but not a whole lot. I'm still thinking, in my mind, if I just saw what they just saw, I think I would be good for at least, 2 or 3 months. Like, there is no reason to complain, like, God's got this. But a God who delivers to them might not be the God who sustains. Getting them out of Egypt was one thing, but helping them to survive every single day seemed like a completely different story. And so listen to this. And this is where I think it's important that we kind of ease off on them just a little bit. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert with what? without finding water. Okay. It's Sunday. It's Sunday at about a little after 10 o'clock. So let's just go with this as specifically as we can, be exact as we can. Okay. I suspect that some of you will have something to drink, some kind of fluids, probably in the next 3 hours. Is that fair? You're going to go to Dickey's, or you're going to go to, oh, I'm so sad. I was going to say Cattle Baron, and I can't say Cattle Baron anymore. You're going to go somewhere to eat. You're going to go home. You're going to get the roast out of the oven, and you're going to sit down, and you're going to drink sweet tea like good, normal, God-fearing people do. None of this unsweet stuff like Lance thinks is like the normal tea. That's not normal. So you're gonna have something to drink. Okay, so that's probably within the next 3 hours. At the very least, the last time most of you had any type of fluid, even though it would have been a small amount, was about 30 minutes ago when we observed and remembered communion. So if we set that down, say at 10 o'clock was the last time you drank something, by 1 o'clock today, you're probably going to have picked up some kind of glass and had a refreshing drink of water or Coke, whatever, right? I can almost guarantee that by 6 p.m., everybody in here will have had a drink of something. Okay, that's 8 hours. Is anybody thinking in their mind, I'm not going to drink anything until 6 o'clock tonight? You would have to be very conscientious of what you're doing so you don't accidentally drink something. It's just going to come naturally. Okay, how many of you thought, I'm going to wait until bedtime tonight. I'm going to stay up till 10 o'clock tonight, and then I'm going to have a drink. That's 12 hours. Like, I don't know about you, but my mouth is already feeling dry thinking about that. Not 12 hours, not 24 or 36 or 48, not 60, but about 72 hours, about 3 days they've gone without finding water. So I just think about this, okay? How easy is it to forget what happened on Thursday when we haven't had a sip of water since then? If you have not had a drink of water since Thursday at 10 a.m., what is on your mind right now? I'm thirsty. So I just want to give the Israelites a little bit of slack. Because I have pointed out numerous times, look, in 21, they're singing, in 24, they're complaining. Like, what a bunch of whiny babies. Like, come on, guys, toughen up. God's with you. Everything's okay. And I just wonder how many times the Israelites would look at me and say, toughen up, Doug. God's with you. Everything's going to be okay. Like, you're complaining about, I'm hungry. I haven't had a snack in the last 2 hours. That's me, right? And God was God before we were hungry. But He's also God when we're hungry. Okay, so when they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why they called the place Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what are we to drink? So what's going on here? Who do they turn to? They turn to Moses. They look at Moses and they say, Moses, we have nothing to drink. What are we going to drink? So the next two steps, the next two things that happen, to me, are really surprising, especially if you have not read ahead. Okay? Think about this. Okay, the first thing is the response of Moses. Okay? Moses was there to help them as the plagues were being brought upon the Egyptians. That ultimately led to the Israelites being delivered, being rescued from their oppressive masters, the slave drivers, the one that beat them, the ones that starved them. Later on, they're going to have good old days syndrome. But the fact is that they were slaves in Egypt. And Moses was there with them. Moses was also with them as they went out into the wilderness and they crossed the Red Sea. He was with them when they saw the pillar of cloud that came between them and the Egyptian army and allowed them to get across. They were all there, right? And in some ways, he was an integral part of their deliverance. God chose Moses as well as Aaron and said, you're going to lead these people out. And after God had done all these things, they're thirsty, granted 3 days in, but they're thirsty, and they turn to Moses and they start complaining. Now, let's be honest. Let's pretend for just a second that you're not in your Sunday clothes. Okay? Let's say you're on your couch and you're wearing your sweatshirt and it's a Saturday. Or it's Monday and you're in the copy room. And somebody walks in and says, I can't believe the dumb copier's not working again. I wish you would get this fixed. Okay, I want you to remove yourself from this is what we say during church. Somebody comes up to you and they start complaining, and it might not have too much to do with you, and you may not have had any responsibility in what led them to where they were. What are you going to say? Fix it? Push. Walk away? I know what I would say, because I know what it's like to have grumbling Israelites. I have 3 kids. And you know what my response is? Go to your room, or deal with it, or fix it yourself. But Moses doesn't do that. I really don't want us to overlook the fact that Moses had a choice. He could have bitten back at him and said, you guys are worthless. Instead, what's he going to do in verse 25? Somebody read Exodus 15:25.
So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. When he cast it into the waters were made sweet. Okay.
What's Moses going to do? He's going to turn and he's going to cry out to God. But there was a difference between what the Israelites did and what Moses did. Two things. Can anybody kind of take a shot at the difference between the Israelites' response to the difficult situation and Moses' response?
They were whining.
Okay.
And complaining.
Okay, they were complaining.
Asked for help.
Okay. One, it was the manner in which they were speaking. They weren't crying out for help. They were complaining. Woe is me. This is terrible. I can't believe this has happened. And the second thing is, they were really addressing the wrong person. The whole point of Exodus is not leaving Egypt. It is entering into a relationship with God. Right? And they haven't figured this out yet. And so Moses is going to help them. He's going to turn to God. Instead of getting mad at them, instead of turning to God and say, did you just hear that? Remember the Red Sea? Like they've already forgotten. Let's start over. I can get through this desert so much faster with just a handful of people. You can pick them. I can pick them. I don't care. But let's get a different group of people, a smaller group, a less complaining group, and we can take care of this. He doesn't say that. He cries out for the people. Now that's one response that I think is pretty fantastic and noteworthy. But there's another response that's going to happen even after Moses cries out to the Lord. What happens next? The Lord is going to offer a solution. If you sit around and think, You know what? I love the God of the New Testament. I mean, there's the cross and there's grace and there's the way that Jesus loves the poor and the infirmed and the women and the outcasts. I mean, we see this just, all you can say about the New Testament is grace, grace, grace. But the Old Testament, that's completely different. And yet here we have God who has done the most phenomenal thing, not only with the 10 plagues and not only with the Red Sea, but now he has an opportunity to either to stick with them or to cut bait. And my thought is, I want the latter. Now, think about this. Just kind of put this away in your mind, because this is not the only time this is going to happen. In fact, this next section of chapters is going to be a broken record of the Israelites complain. Moses is going to hear their cry. He's going to plead for them, and God is going to offer grace, and he's going to help them over and over again. He doesn't stop offering grace. It's going to happen over and over and over again. I don't want you to get stuck on the Israelites are always complaining. I want you to get stuck on God keeps on loving and sustaining people who are complaining. He just doesn't stop. There he talks about it depends on your translation. It could be either a tree, it could be a piece of wood, but God instructs Moses to take the wood and throw it in the water, and then you get in this long convoluted discussion about, well, did the wood actually provide some natural filtering method that allowed the water to be sweet and no longer bitter? And we don't know that. There are going to be people who are going to go through Exodus, and every time there's a miracle, they're going to say, no, let me explain. This is how it really happened. This is what it really is. But I think as we get more and more into it, you're going to see, at some point, you're just going to have to say, this is God who can do things that we can't explain, or I just can't believe this at all. I don't think, if you want to ride the line of, I think I can use science to prove how this happened, I think you're relying a little bit too much on what you think you know and a little bit less on, we just have to have faith that God can do things that we can't explain or understand. And believe it or not, especially when you step into a room full of scholars, when you step onto a university, more and more and more Bible scholars are going to tell you the miracles that happened in the Bible didn't really happen, or they didn't happen in the way that you were taught that they happened when you were in Sunday school. Not just crazy liberal thinking, left-leaning people in Bible scholarship, but you go down the road and you're going to hear it in some places like LCU. You're going to hear it in some places like ACU. You're going to hear it in a lot of different places. There are more and more people who are starting to say, well, that really didn't happen. That's just a really good story to talk about how God sustains us. And it wasn't the Red Sea, and they'll talk about, well, it was the Sea of Reeds, and that couldn't have happened then because it was a different place, and it was too shallow, and they're going to start, well, the manna, it really didn't happen that way. There's no way it could have happened that way, and they're going to give some historical evidence in which they think proves that God didn't work in the way that he did, and there never was that many people, and it would have been impossible to have 2 million people wandering around in the desert and feeding them. It just couldn't have happened. Now, what's odd to me is that those same people who say that couldn't have happened, they still anchor themselves at the empty tomb, which is fantastic that they believe that. But I just struggle with the idea of we have basically 3/4 of the Bible, the Old Testament, where we have to kind of tear out and say these are really good stories, but God didn't really perform any miracles other than Jesus being raised from the dead. And so it really is a struggle for me. And so I find myself more and more when I consult commentaries and I do research on this, I have a lot of people who are like, that didn't happen. Like, we don't even need to talk about what the details could have been like, or if wood was really in there, or we're going to talk about this little white material in a little bit, which is literally called, what is that? And they're going to say, yeah, that didn't really happen. A lot of people. And this is causing some issues. I'm kind of getting off topic, but I don't mean to, but I will for just a second. This is causing a lot of issues because we have young men and young women who are graduating from these universities, and they're going out, some of them into ministry, and they're standing up in front of people and they're saying, yeah, all those stories you heard, they're not really true. And people who are sitting in the pews going, whoa, wait, what are we talking about? Like, I remember it. Maybe you weren't there, but you remember the flannel graph, and all of a sudden people are saying, yeah, that really didn't happen. I'm going to stand here today and I'm going to say, I believe it happened. I could be wrong. But I would much rather stand before God and say, I believe you can do things that I can't understand or imagine or explain, than to say, science says that it couldn't happen. Or there's no historical document of Pharaoh leaving Egypt, and so it didn't happen that way. Because the craziest story in the Bible, it doesn't happen in the Old Testament. It's talked about in the Old Testament. It's prophesied. It's alluded to. But it's the New Testament when the craziest thing that ever happens is this combination of God sending His Son, who is born in poverty and is hated by his people, who becomes a rabbi at 30, and then ultimately Son of God, King of earth, dies on a cross, and then God raises him back to life. So I don't know that there's a story crazier than that. You can say, Jonah being swallowed by a big fish. I don't know if that could happen. How about Son of God being swallowed by the earth for 3 days and coming back to life? The stories that we're going to look at in the next chapter or so are just going to be pretty unbelievable. And you just have to decide, do I really want to believe this? Can I hang my faith on this? Can I read the words when Paul says, all Scripture is God-breathed and it is useful? Can I believe that this really happened? Or do I say, it's just a really good tale that reminds us that God's always with us? So here we are. I've gotten us way off track. Hey, that's great. We haven't changed our clock since last week. So technically, I still have an hour and 22 minutes left. Sweet. We're in good shape. We're going to get further than I thought we would. Or you're all going to walk out on me. Okay. So Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it in the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made a decree and a law for them, and there He tested them. He said, if you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in His eyes, if you pay attention to His commands and keep all His decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. And when he says this, I don't think he's saying he doesn't say the Israelites will never have a sickness, they'll never have an itch, they'll never have a pain, as long as you do. He's saying, he's referring more to the plagues that he brought down. I will bring those plagues on you. He's not saying they will never have any illness or disease or sickness, because we know that they're humans and that their bodies are going to fail and they're going to die. And so he's not saying you're going to live forever in the desert. What a terrible victory that would be. Then he came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. So there's excitement. They finally get to a place where they can have some rest, they have some shade, they have some water, and God is taking care of them. So everything is good, and the Israelites are not going to complain anymore because they crossed the Red Sea. God delivered him. They were thirsty. God gave them something to drink. And so now they said, we can really trust and believe that God's looking after us. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they'd come out of Egypt. If you're doing the math, they are now 1 month removed from when they had celebrated, or I guess we should say observed, the Passover. From now on, they'll celebrate it, but at this point they were observing it. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. So this wasn't a few people. It wasn't the leaders. It wasn't the delegates. It wasn't the ones who always have something to complain about. The whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. What are they saying right there? If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. What do they mean? If they'd been slaves? Yeah. But by whose hand were they wanting to die by? How was God's mighty hand displayed in Egypt? By the Passover. This was not like, I wish I just stayed there. I wish you had killed us like you killed the other Egyptians. That seems to be what they're asking. If only we had died in that way. If only the plague had fallen on us. If only we had not had the Passover lamb and painted the blood. If only we had died then. If you had taken our lives then, we wouldn't have to deal with this. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out in the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Does anybody in here think that the Israelites had an all-you-can-eat buffet as slaves in Egypt? What's going on here? Why are they saying that? Why would they say, we had tons of food back then? Do you think that they were a bunch of full-bellied, happy slaves in Egypt? Does anybody think that Pharaoh would have treated them with kindness and mercy?
No.
So why are they saying, remember when we had all the good food back at home? Later on, they're going to say, hey, we missed when we got to eat onions and the leeks and the vegetables, all that good stuff. Here they're complaining about, we used to sit around and there was plenty of meat for all of us.
They were familiar of what was going on when they were in Egypt. They're not familiar what's going on in the desert.
But do you think they were getting the food that they act like, or they're saying that they got? What's going on here? Psychologically, somebody tell me what's happening. It's the good old days. And I don't mean to step on toes, because if I do, I need to put on steel-toed boots, because I'm the first one who does this. But how many of you, I won't make you raise your hand, but how many of you within the last week has said, I wish we could go back to the good old days? Or the phrase that we use, I wish we could go back to normal. How many of you have thought that in the last week? If you haven't, you're probably a little crazy. Or you're somebody who I want to sit at the feet of and learn from. Because I can't tell you how many times that I sat and said, oh, I wish I could go back to normal. Oh, man. 2019 was the best year ever. I wish every year could be like 2000. How many of you have thought that? How many of you living in 2019 sat down and said, it doesn't get any better than this? Did anybody say, this is a red letter year, this is the year I'm going to tell my kids about? Like, oh, the good old days of 2019. Like, I can remember being in 2019. And I can remember talking about, man, we're always stressed out. And we're overworked and we're tired. And I said, if we could just have a break, if we could just stop doing what we're doing for just a little bit, it would be perfect. Like everything could be better than it was. And we could have this, it would be back to normal. Because in 2019, I can remember thinking in 2019 that 10 years ago in 2009, that's when life was really good. Remember the good old days of 2009? Remember the good old days of 1999? Lynn, 1909? Remember those? Those are good years. You don't think, I mean, people, we talk about, oh, the good old days. My son, he likes old cars. And when I say old cars, it's like the cars that I grew up with. Like he's like an 85 Trans Am would be awesome. I would love something like that. Would be so cool. And I'm like, like they didn't have like air conditioners in some of those. Like by 85 they did, but by the 70s, like air conditioning was like you rolled down your window. My mom tells me about the good old days. She said like only the really wealthy people could afford air conditioning in your car when you first came out. But everybody wanted everybody else to think that they were the rich ones that had air conditioning. So she said people would drive down the freeway in Texas. It's 112 degrees outside. And they would have their windows rolled up because they wanted everybody else to think, dude, they have air conditioning in their car. It must be nice and cool in there. And she's like, inside, we were just like sweating to death. But we want everybody to think, wow, they must have that fancy air conditioning in their car. I don't want to go back to that. I don't want that. I want climate-controlled cars. I want to have a vehicle with heated seats. Someday I'm going to get one with those heated steering wheel. Can you imagine that? The good old days are not what it used to be. And this is exactly what the Israelites were thinking. If we could just go back, it would be better then. Because they had forgotten. Their memory, what they were recalling, was not what actually happened, but what they wanted to remember. And what they wanted to say was, life used to be really good. And now we're stuck in the desert. And what happens now? What do? They talk about all these foods that they had as if they were stuffed all the time. And then listen to this. Verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, I'm sick and tired of these people. All they do is complain. I'm getting rid of them. I am grieved that I called them. That sounds about right. But this is what we get. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are going to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them. This word test them is going to be really important. We're going to see a little bit more of this later on. I'm going to test them and see whether or not they follow my instructions. The word instruction happens to be the Hebrew word Torah. Sound familiar? It's what we call the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which within the Torah we have the greatest instructions we're going to get in a few chapters is going to be what? The 10 Commandments. Okay. On the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. You grumbled against God, you complained, and so he is going with his mighty arm. He's going to feed you. This is a God of grace. This is the same God of the New Testament. It's the same God of the Old Testament. He has called them, he delivers them, and now he sustains them. And Moses added, who are we that you should grumble against us? And Moses also said, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against you. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. I'll try to share the story as quickly as I can, but this story always reminds me of the time I was up in the mountains in Colorado with a bunch of kids in the youth group and a few guides. It had been the craziest trip. We'd gone on what's called a wilderness trek, which means they take a bunch of city slickers who have air conditioning and mattresses and all the things that any normal person should want. And they take them out into the wilderness, and you go climb up a mountain, which is not the bad part. I love that part. The only bad part is when you get done, there's no lazy boy to sit in and nothing to sleep on. It is just, that's the most awful part about camping. Lance loves to camp. I'm like, something's wrong with you. I will hike all day long and into the night, but when we get done and I lay down, I want it to be soft and comfortable, not a rock or what they call a pad that's like that thick. It weighs like 2 ounces. You roll it out, it's awful. Okay, so we're up there on the mountain. It had been terrible. It had been raining, and our group, we had somebody who got sick, so we had some people up on the mountain, and then a group went down, and the group was coming back up. Well, all that was taking place, we were in the middle of a mealtime, right? And so I was starving because at that time, I could eat anything in the world and couldn't gain weight, but I could eat everything, and I did eat everything. I ate everything. And so we're up there on the mountain. We're starving. For lunch, they had packed us Vienna sausages. I'm not going to tell you what I did to the Vienna sausage that I tried to eat, but it was terrible. So lunch, I hardly had anything. We'd been working hard. I ended up going back and forth a few times and had several packs on me, trying to make sure we got up, and they took somebody down. So the bottom line is there's about 10 of us cooking, but we all carried the food together. And so we're like, okay, we need to cook all this food, but we have 3 more people who are going to be coming up in just a little bit. So we're cooking for 13, we're eating for 10, we have to leave leftovers, right? And so the meal that night was my favorite meal in the world, even to this day. And I get made fun of for this, but I don't care. Mac and cheese. I love mac and cheese. And I am starving, and my body has said, I have burned 8,000 calories. You better double that in what you're going to put back in. And I'm looking at this bowl, and I'm like, this couldn't feed me on a day where I sat down. I am starving, and I have to save this for these people. And we can't just like leave them a few there, right? So like I'm eating and I see this whole bowl of mac and cheese left over, and I'm like, I'm not allowed to eat this. We have to save this for the people who come up there. And I can just remember praying to God. I prayed to God on that mountain, starving to death. Lord, I need some food. Please help me make it through. Right? And God, in his infinite wisdom and great humor, elbowed one of his angels and said, this guy thinks he's hungry. He wants to eat more. So, an hour later, after the macaroni and cheese has kind of helped stave off the hunger pains and I'm feeling okay, up come the 3 people who we had saved the food for. And I'm like, okay, I made it. It's going to be okay. I'm not happy about this, but when they went down into town to drop somebody off, they were gone for a really long time because they decided they were going to stop and eat hamburgers. So then they turn and look at me. And at this point, I'm like, really? I ate like this much mac and cheese? And then they look at me and they say, we do have wildlife around here. Like, you can't leave mac and cheese. Like, we can't just dig a hole and bury it. Like, animals are going to find it and they'll come after it and they'll be in our tent and campsite. Like, somebody's got to eat this. Okay. And I repented. And I cried as I ate that last noodle. And my stomach hurt so bad. because I ate enough mac and cheese for way more than 3 people. And my stomach hurt so bad, and I said, God, I will never, ever ask you again. And I think the next day when they offered us more Vienna sausages, I think I cried out to the Lord again. But I think it's so many times we are in the moment and we think, oh, if only God can give me this. God, just show me this and I promise like everything will be okay. We made it up the mountain later on and we got to see the most beautiful sight. And I just remember thinking how awesome God was. And it was so humbling. Because when I sat in the tent and I was hungry, I don't remember thinking, oh, God, you're so awesome. So we're going to do a little exercise before we leave. It doesn't mean that you have to get up or move or anything like that. But we're going to do something that seems a little unusual, but it's really not that unusual at all. We're going to sing a song now, except we're not going to sing the song. I just want you, as a congregation, as a group of people, I want you to read what you sang earlier today. This is one of my most favorite songs ever written. And one of the reasons why I love it is because it is so humbling, and it reminds me how we have a God who is God in the good times and the bad times, and our response to him should sound a little bit like this. So we're just going to try to read this. Imagine there's no notes there. Okay, you ready? Here we go. Letting go of every... Okay, I can't do this by myself. I want you to help me out, if you want to. Letting go of every single dream, I lay each one down at your feet. Okay? All the dreams that you have, you're saying, I'm going to give up on those dreams. Every moment of my wandering never changes what you see. I've tried to win this war, I confess. My hands are weary, I need your rest. Mighty warrior, king of the fight, no matter what I face, you're by my side. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. The truth is, you know what tomorrow brings. There's not a day ahead you have not seen. So in all things be my life and breath. I want what you want, Lord, and nothing less. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. You are my strength and comfort. You are my steady hand. You are my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand. Your ways are always higher. Your plans are always good. There's not a place where I'll go you've not already stood. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. My prayer is that whether you find yourself on the shores of the Red Sea, on one side with Pharaoh chasing you, or on the other side and your enemies are drowned, whether you're in the desert and you're hungry or you're eating the manna, I just want us to be a people who say, I will trust in you when things are working and when things aren't. That's the God that we serve, and he deserves that kind of praise. He is worthy of it. I want to close out in prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father God, I just pray that we will trust in you. Today is Sunday, and it is a great day. I'm with my family, with the people that I love, and we've had an opportunity to remember your son Jesus, to sing songs of worship and know that you're a God who gives us the victory. But tomorrow, we go back out into the desert. Tomorrow we're reminded of words like pandemic, and cancer and loss and political issues. And so, God, when things don't turn out on Monday like they did on Sunday, may we be a people that just trusts in you. And so tomorrow and today, let us just be thankful that we have a God who sustains us and delivers us. And know that when tomorrow comes, you're already there. And you've got it taken care of. May we trust in you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you for being here. We will see you on Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Have a great week.